Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tipped. My name is Julian, and in today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down the goalie depth chart for every team in the NHL, so you know exactly who is starting, who's going to be the backup, and who's going to be the backup of the backup for every team in the NHL. As we know, over the past few years, the goaltending position in the NHL has been an absolute carousel. This year was no different, and with so many moves, it was pretty hard to track exactly who went where, so I figured I'd make it easier on you guys and make a video on goaltending depth charts. This video is going to be helpful to you in case you want to know what goalies have bona fide starting jobs and which have a timeshare. I'll be sure to explain that for every single team. This will also be useful to you during the season if you want to make a backup goalie spot start at some point during the season, or even a number 3 goalie spot start if the backup is injured. Before we jump into the content though, guys, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you want notifications for all of my preseason content. Guys, I'm going to be trying my absolute best to help you prepare for the upcoming season, so be sure to hit that notification bell to get notified as soon as a new video comes live. Alright, let's jump into it now. Let's start with the Anaheim Ducks. And for the Ducks, it hasn't changed a whole lot. John Gibson is that number 1 goalie in Anaheim. Anthony Stolarz right behind him as the backup, and then Lucas Dostal as the 3rd goalie in Anaheim. It's pretty much exactly the same as last year. Now, even though I like Stolarz a lot as a backup, Gibson should get almost all the starts in Anaheim. He's going to get pretty much everything except for the back-to-backs. Stolarz will also probably start a game here and there just to keep Gibson fresh, but Gibson will get the vast majority of the starts. Moving on to the Arizona Coyotes, and their starting goalie is Karel Vejmelka, backed up by Ivan Prosvetov. There's a small chance that Gillies might be the backup this year, but to me it makes more sense to start Prosvetov. He's a decent young prospect, and he could have a pretty bright future in the NHL. Vejmelka should get the vast majority of the starts, but if he struggles at all, Prosvetov could see some starts as well. Last year we saw that with Wedgwood. When Vejmelka would struggle, Wedgwood would get quite a few starts in a row because he would play well. So if Vejmelka struggles at any point and Prosvetov plays well, he might string together a few starts in a row. But for the most part, Vejmelka should be starting in Arizona. In Boston, we have a Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark goalie timeshare. I see Swayman starting about 60% of the starts and Ullmark starting about 40%. However, if Swayman struggles at all, it'll be closer to 50-50, and Ullmark could even see a little bit more. And as the 3rd goalie, they have Keith Kincaid if either of the other guys get injured. In Buffalo, the starter this year is going to be Craig Anderson, at least at the start of the year, backed up by Eric Comrie, who is a very solid backup goalie. If Anderson gets injured, and he does have a history of injuries, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen should step up as the number 1 goalie in Buffalo, but to start off the year, he will probably be the number 3 goalie, and because Buffalo's goalies have such an injury history, I included Malcolm Subban here as their number 4 goalie. And then in Calgary, the only thing that has changed is their 3rd goalie, Oscar Dansk. He's going to be backing up Markstrom and Vlader. He'll only be active, though, if Markstrom or Vlader get injured. And once again, guys, Markstrom's going to see pretty much every single start for Calgary except for the back-to-backs. Markstrom is one of the best goalies around, and he's going to have another solid year. Moving on to Carolina, and Frederik Andersen is obviously the number 1 goalie there, and he's going to get most of the starts while he is healthy. Raanta will get the back-to-back games and the occasional other game, but Andersen is going to be getting the vast majority of the starts. I don't love Raanta this year for fantasy purposes unless Andersen gets injured. As a 3rd goalie, they have Peter Kochetkov, and he's only going to come in if one of those guys gets injured. Moving on to Chicago, and they have Peter Mrazek as their starting goalie, and he had a pretty lousy season last year with Toronto, but Chicago is going to be basically forced to use him as their starter, no matter how bad he does. I don't love him for fantasy this year. Chicago's going to be a really bad team, but if you're super desperate and do need a starting goalie, Peter Mrazek is that. They have Alex Dalek as a backup, was injured most of the season last year, but did come back. And then didn't play very well in that one game he did come back in, but he will be the backup in Chicago. And if somebody gets injured, Arvid Soderblom should come in and be their 3rd goalie. Moving on to the Colorado Avalanche, and this is going to be a really interesting situation because this could end up being a 50-50 timeshare between Georgiev and Pavel Francouz. To start off the year, Georgiev should be given the upper hand and being the starter. However, he did not have a good year in New York last year, so he's going to have to really prove himself in the preseason and in training camps. If not, Pavel Francouz may end up even being the starter this year in Colorado because he was actually pretty solid when called upon last year in Colorado. So we'll have to see how that all shakes up, but I wouldn't draft any of these guys before really seeing how the preseason looks for Colorado because it's pretty risky. So if you have your draft really early for whatever reason, I'd probably steer clear of these guys. And that's why I always suggest drafting your teams only a couple days before the season actually starts. And then as a third goalie, they have Jonas Johansson, and I really hope that they don't have to use him this year. He is atrocious. Moving on to Columbus, Elvis Merzlikins is their starting goalie. Korpisalo was terrible last year, but he should still be their backup. And then their number 3 goalie is Daniil Tarasov. Merzlikins should get the vast majority of the starts, everything except for the back-to-backs, as long as he's healthy. For Dallas, they have Jake Ottinger as their starting goalie. He's a fantastic goalie, should get pretty much every start as well. Wedgwood will get the back-to-back starts, and that's probably about it. He may get the occasional other start if he plays well, but that's going to be pretty much all Wedgwood gets. Ottinger's going to get a lot of starts this year. Anton Khudobin, however, is their number 3 goalie. And he didn't have the best year last year, which is why he's relegated to that position, but there's a good chance that he could get traded this year if a team is in need for a goalie at any point. Then for Detroit, it should be a timeshare between Husso and Nedeljkovic. It could be 70-30, it could be 60-40. It really depends how Nedeljkovic plays this year. He didn't have such a great year last year, but the year before that in Carolina, he was absolutely amazing. It'll be interesting to see how he performs this year, knowing that he's not going to get that many starts if he doesn't perform because Husso is on the team. And then their number 3 goalie is Jussi Olkinuora, who's never played in the NHL, but he is the guy who probably would be called up if anybody got injured. He's actually a really interesting case because he's 31 years old and Detroit signed him directly out of the KHL after having a really good couple of seasons. So he should be playing in the AHL for the most part this year, but if somebody gets injured, maybe he'll be pretty decent in the NHL. Then in Edmonton, I'm expecting Jack Campbell to get the vast majority of the starts there, but I do think Stuart Skinner is going to get a decent amount of starts as well. It could be as high as 35% of the starts for Stuart Skinner, and even higher if he plays that well. He's a really good goalie, and I think this tandem of Campbell and Skinner is going to bode really well for the Oilers this year. And then as a third goalie, they have Calvin Pickard if anybody gets injured. For Florida, I've gone over this in a couple other videos. Bobrovsky and Knight, I don't know what the time split's going to be. I'm giving Bobrovsky the slight advantage right now. Could end up being 50%, 50-50. Could end up being 60-40. I don't really know what it's going to look like in Florida in terms of a timeshare. But these are the 2 guys that will be getting the starts. And if one of them gets injured, Alex Lyon should see some starts as well. Moving on to LA, and they have Jonathan Quick and Calvin Peterson. Now, Quick should have a bit of an advantage going into the year, might get a few more starts to begin with. However, Peterson is their goalie of the future, and Quick is getting older, so it might make sense for LA to force-feed Calvin Peterson more games until he really starts showing how good he can be. I know he's going to be a very good goalie in the future. Didn't show it last year, but should show it this year. Could definitely take the number 1 spot in LA. Their number 3 goalie is Phoenix Copley. In Minnesota, they have Marc-Andre Fleury as their number 1 goalie, and Philip Gustafsson as their backup. Fleury should get pretty much all the starts, although Gustafsson is no slouch. I actually think he's a pretty decent goalie. Should get the back-to-back games and maybe a couple others here and there. And then their number 3 goalie is Zane McIntyre, who did not play in the NHL last year. In Montreal, it was recently announced that Carey Price will be missing the entire season, which is not news to me. I pretty much assumed that that would be the case. Jake Allen is going to be their number 1 goalie once again. Could be traded at the deadline, though, if any team is in need for a goalie because he's on the last year of his contract, and Montreal is in the business of acquiring assets these days. Samuel Montembeault will be their backup, and then Caden Primo will be the number 3 goalie. For Nashville, my boy UC Saros will be their number 1 goalie. Absolutely love him. The guy started 67 games last year, and I expect something pretty similar this year. UC Saros is amazing, and he's an incredible goalie, and he gives the team a chance to win every single night. Their backup is Kevin Lankinen, who's an okay goalie, but isn't really much more than a backup, and he should pretty much just be getting those back-to-back games, unless he really impresses, which I'm not really expecting him to. And as a third goalie, they have Connor Ingram, just like they did last year. In New Jersey, they have Mackenzie Blackwood and Vitek Vanacek as a 1A, 1B kind of situation. Blackwood, as long as he's healthy, which he's had trouble with being healthy, his entire career, but should get the majority of the starts. And then Vitek Vanacek might get 40%, and Blackwood would get about 60%. Now, they still have Jonathan Bernier, who is hopeful to be ready for training camp in September. Obviously, the report of Bernier being ready for September was, given a while ago, so maybe he's not ready for September. And if he's not, maybe he'll be out the whole season. I don't really know what the situation is with Bernier right now, but they do still have him on their roster, and we'll have to see if he does end up being healthy. If he is, he would end up being their number 3 goalie. If Bernie is not healthy, it would be Nico Dawes as their number 3 goalie. For New York, they have Ilya Sorokin as their number 1 goalie. Should get the majority of the starts this year, although I think Varlamov's still going to see a decent amount of starts. May end up being something like a 65-35 split, but Sorokin is an amazing goalie. As their number 3 goalie, they have Ken Appleby, who's only ever played 3 games in the NHL for the Devils a little while back. I don't think he's going to end up playing really for the Islanders, because even when they do have a goalie injured, they tend to just start Sorokin or Varlamov just all the games, which is pretty crazy, but that's what they tend to do. So Appleby, even if he does get called up, may not end up playing a whole lot. In New York, not a surprise, Igor Shesterkin is the number 1 goalie there. He just won the Vezina, guys. He's going to be one of the best goalies in the league once again this year for a really good New York Rangers team. Yaroslav Halak will actually be the backup in New York this year. He's a pretty decent backup as well. And then Louis Domingue will be their number 3 goalie. For Ottawa, it's going to be Cam Talbot and Anton Forsberg, which is going to be another 1A, 1B situation there. Anton Forsberg had a pretty good year last year for Ottawa, so I see him still starting about 35 to 40% of the starts, unless he really doesn't do well, in which case Talbot probably will get even more than that. But that's what I'm seeing right now as a starting ratio. And then as number 3 goalie, they have Matt Sogard. For the Flyers, they have Carter Hart as their starter once again. Had another pretty disappointing season, but the Flyers as a whole kind of suck, so it's not necessarily all his fault. As a backup this year, though, they have Ivan Fedotov, who was a former 7th round pick by Philadelphia. They signed him out of the KHL. He's going to be pretty interesting to watch this year and see how he does. Obviously, I'm not expecting him to do amazing because the Flyers aren't such a great team, but maybe he's going to look pretty good and share the crease with Carter Hart, maybe 50-50. And as a number 3 goalie, they have Troy Grosnick and Felix Sandstrom. In Pittsburgh, not much has changed. Jari is still the number 1 goalie there. He's a really good goalie, had an awesome season last year. Was really happy to see that personally. DeSmith is going to be the backup, and then Dustin Tokarski, who played for the Sabres last year, is going to be their number 3 goalie. Honestly, not a terrible number 3 goalie. And then we get to San Jose, and oh, San Jose. James Reimer is slated to be their starter right now. He was the best goalie last year, so looks like he's going to be the guy to get the majority of the starts. However, Kaapo Kakkonen's also a very young, promising goalie. Could see a lot of starts this year as well. And then they also have Aiden Hill, who's a decent goalie. Right now, it looks like he's going to be their number 3 goalie. However, I think San Jose might end up trading one of these guys because they have 3 really competent goalies with Reimer, Kakkonen, and Hill. And they don't need 3 guys that can all be starting goalies. And then 4th, they have Aaron Dell if, 2 of these guys gets injured or 1 gets injured and 1 gets traded. In Seattle, they have Philip Grubauer as their number 1 goalie, and I'm expecting him to have a much better year than he did last year. He was not very good last year, but even so, he saw the vast majority of the starts last year. And then Chris Drieger's out for a very long time, till at least January. So Martin Jones is going to be the backup there in Seattle. And then as a number 3 goalie, they have Joey Decord and Magnus Hellberg. Whoever plays better in the AHL is probably going to be the guy that gets called up. In St. Louis, they have Jordan Binnington, who's once again their starter because they traded Ville Husso away to Detroit. And then Thomas Greiss will be backing him up. So I do actually kind of like Jordan Binnington as a fantasy asset this year because he's got a pretty locked-in number 1 spot. As a number 3 goalie, they have Joel Hofer. In Tampa Bay, obviously, it's Andrei Vasilevsky, who's going to get all of the starts in Tampa Bay except for the back-to-backs. And those back-to-backs will be started by Brian Elliott. And as a number 3 goalie, they have Maxim Lagacé. In Toronto, they have Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov. Now, I have no idea what the split's going to end up being like between Murray and Samsonov because both these goalies have a lot to prove. But for now, I'm giving the edge to Matt Murray. I think he's going to have a nice rebound season if he can stay healthy, which is a big thing also for Matt Murray, has not been able to stay healthy. So we'll have to see what happens there, but Matt Murray, for now, I think should start at least 60% of the starts, and Samsonov should probably get around 40%. Their number 3 goalie is once again Eric Kallgren. In Vancouver, Thatcher Demko will get almost all the starts, guys. He saw 61 starts last year, and unless he gets injured, I see something pretty similar this year. Spencer Martin is going to be their backup last year. Looked pretty good in the short sample size that he played last year, so I think he's going to be a pretty decent backup. And then as a number 3 goalie, they have Colin Delia, who played for the Blackhawks last year. Moving on to Vegas, and it was recently announced that Robin Lehner is going to miss the entire season, which leaves Logan Thompson to be their number 1 goalie. Should get the vast majority of the starts, assuming that they don't trade for a goalie. Laurent Brossoit will be the backup, although he'll be injured probably at the very start of the year. And then Michael Hutchinson will be the number 3 goalie in Vegas. And then in Washington, they have completely changed their goaltending. Their number 1 goalie is Darcy Kemper this year, and he had an awesome year with the Colorado Avalanche. but that was the Colorado Avalanche. And if he struggles at all this year, Charlie Lindgren, who is their number 2 goalie, might see some starts. In the few games that he started with St. Louis last year, he looked absolutely amazing. Started only 4 games, ended up with 5 wins, so he actually came in relief and won another game. Had a crazy save percentage, as you see on screen there. And I think he's going to be a really good backup. So if Kemper, struggles at all, Lindgren might see, quite a few starts this year. But for now, I think Kemper will get the vast majority of the starts in Washington. And then as a number 3 goalie, they have Fucale once again. And last but not least, in Winnipeg, they have Connor Hellebuyck as the number 1 goalie. No surprise there, but this year they have David Rittich as a backup. Hellebuyck will be getting pretty much every single start though, guys. Rittich will probably only be seeing the back-to-back starts. As number 3 goalie, they have Mikhail Burdin. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. I hope you guys enjoyed this type of content. This is a new video that I've never done before, so if you enjoyed it, please leave a like, leave me a comment down below, let me know if this was helpful, and hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.